Great. So all right, so let's get started. I think the place where we sort of left off was talking about the Bootstrap CSS. And just as you get inside of your browser, I'm just at the kind of the getbootstrap.com inside the examples. I'm looking specifically at the grid, which is particularly precious to the Bootstrap system in general. As you kind of parse the page, you can see that there are different sort of building blocks where that's a heading 1 and that's a paragraph, and these are, but then you have these columns here, and as you click on these columns you'll realize that these are what are called a div, which represents a dividing structural element inside of your HTML, and then there's a class associated with it, and that class is a column of medium size of width 4. Now Bootstrap gives you 12 units. So here's 4 plus 4 plus 4 is a 12 unit column. And you can have a column of length 6 and a column of length 3, and you can mix that together. You can have 2 columns where there's an 8 and a 4. And then basically you can stock that column full of all the text and the words, images, JavaScript, other things you want within that column. And when I use my inspect element, I can kind of click on things as I see them, and then I can sort of expose the values of that CSS. So I go up to that, and what's interesting is you can actually see what the div looks like and the various styling that's going on. Now the reason why that's taking place is because if you read up in the HTML, inside of the head, we are linking to a CSS called bootstrap.min.css. The CSS is particularly meaningful to us because it contains all the styling DNA that is responsible for the appearance of that document. So this notion of column MD8, which is a type of div, the div class is only possible because of our implementation of that CSS. So tonight we're going to get started coding HTML, but let me say that HTML and CSS are meant to work together. HTML is not meant to work without CSS. And as we train you as professional developers, you need to understand that all of the identity of the website is inside of the CSS. It's not in the HTML. The HTML is just the steel girders that hold the page together. It is not the identity of the building whatsoever. It's not the product. It's the CSS. But also as you expose that CSS, this is a row, the styling information is going to appear here. And you'll just simply learn the different attributes that appear inside of each of the classes of CSS. So we'll get into that in a minute. So let's go over to Eclipse, and I have my project here. Now I've gone ahead and I've put my CSS and my fonts and my JavaScript that belongs to Bootstrap here, and then there's a folder inside of the project called Web Content, and I'm going to say new, HTML file. Now, depending upon the IDE that you've selected, this is kind of the way that it goes. Is you have a type of project, and there are a type of assets that appear in the project, and so as you create new things, it'll create a new Java file if you're doing it in Java, or a new JavaScript if you want that. We're going to reside predominantly with HTML files, and we're going to be writing JavaScript inside of those. So let's go to HTML file, and we want to create what's called our index, because our cloud is actually quite hungry for our index file. And let's store that inside of the web content folder here, and you can change the encoding, but that'll go in there, and it will be of HTML5. So there's a basic kind of HTML template code that will be in the file when we begin. So we're going to go finish, and so this is going to be our index.html. Now recall that when we go to our AWS, we'll upload this as soon as we can. Your bucket demands for there to be an index.html as well as an error.html. And you can see inside of a functioning site, and we'll use this bucket as a functioning, you're going to have an index, and then there also should be an error.html there as well. Now later on this evening I'm going to go ahead and upload, and you can see that I've already uploaded this here, and this page has, it has a basis, and this one is encoded with a little bit of the JavaScript that you're going to use later, that will force a Facebook login. And so for the index that we're going to make tonight, we want to, give it some markup. So here we have the HTML5. Now HTML5 is past the age where we are raving about the fact that it's HTML5. But about 6 years ago, 2009, 2010, Google was really on an evangelical mission to promote HTML5. And it worked. Everything is HTML5 right now. HTML5 is really the departure from the earlier HTML that we were coding at the earlier part of the decade. And the way that you turn on HTML5 is you just simply say doctype HTML. And then you begin the HTML. And the HTML is interpreted by the browser. Guys, it's software engineers who have kind of constructed the modern web. And so they see the HTML and the JavaScript as the source code for the internet. So as this JavaScript and HTML arrives inside of the browser acts as a compiler for this raw source code that arrives, which is a really interesting proposition, because here you have the internet actually sending you interpretable code. And so it was a lot of compiler developers that were making the first functional commercial web browsers for folks to use, Netscape, Gecko, and the like. So when you're tagging your HTML, you're actually signaling to the browser, hey, I've got some HTML coming up. So later, as you insert other things like ASP and JavaScript, you're also going to be flagging, you're going to be signaling to the browser, hey, get ready to interpret and compile some JavaScript. So we'll be getting there, pretty soon. But given the fact that I want to code with some Bootstrap tonight, I want to say my language, my HTML, is going to be English. And then I'm going to get into my head. And then someone is just asking me about zooming it, and it's a good question. Let's pause the video and we'll try to reproject.